Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason De La Rosa, and you're listening to an all-new season of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are back, folks. It is the 2023 football season. I will start off by apologizing for last week and a lack of an episode. We had some technical difficulties, but we are fixed. We are ready to go. We have a season opening week to talk about because we had games both Thursday and Friday. We have a lot of Thursday, Friday this season. More than half of the weeks of the football season, we have local teams playing on a Thursday or a Friday. And we will break it all down for you. We'll preview what's coming up in this case week 2, but in succeeding weeks, we will keep you informed as to what's going on around Grayson County and the 14 football programs as we welcome back Texoma Christian to the mix this season. And for those unfamiliar, we will go from biggest to smallest, work our way down the schedule for the upcoming week, and look back on those teams' games as we discuss what is coming ahead. So without further ado, we will kick off our look back at week 1 and what is up in week 2. And of course, we cannot start anywhere else but in the Battle of the Axe between Sherman and Denison, the 125th edition, the final 42-0. Denison keeps the Axe in resounding fashion. It is their 11th straight victory in this rivalry. It matches the all-time winning streak that was held by Sherman from the late 60s through the late 70s. Sherman does have a 13-game unbeaten streak because after they won 11 in a row, there was a tie, and then they won the next year after that. Of course, now you cannot have ties anymore because overtime exists. But Denison extends its record. It obviously had never won this many in a row, and they do it by that 42-0 score. And they do it in a little bit of everything from both sides of the ball. Obviously, the first place and probably the best place to start is the defense. When you don't allow any points, regardless of who you're playing, whether it's your rival or not, that is the story. And in this case, Denison shuts out Sherman for the first time since 1986. It's actually the first time they've opened any season with a shutout since 1968. That came against Durant, so I went back and looked and saw that the last time that they did it against a Texas opponent was against Bonham in 1933. So a very rare start to the season for Denison with the shutout, and of course coming against Sherman. They held the Bearcats to 170 yards. In that is 23 yards on 29 carries. That is aided a little bit by a bad snap that lost 21 yards, but still very impressive defensive performance. 4 turnovers forced, 3 of them fumbles, and the story with that was that 2 of those turnovers were returned for touchdowns, and they were both returned by the same player, Lathan Bailey, who returned a fumble 52 yards right before the half. 3 seconds left. Sherman is driving after getting the ball at their 40 with about a minute left in the half. It's 7-0, and Sherman's getting the ball to start the second half, so they're trying to do the wraparound touchdown situation, go score, tie the score, come out third quarter, go down and score, take a 14-7 lead. But instead, quarterback pressure on a drop back, strip sack fumble forced by Devin Jeffries, and Bailey's right there to scoop and return at the 52 yards. And then as part of a stretch in the third quarter, in 5 minutes, Denison scored 3 touchdowns, the last of which was Bailey returning an interception 17 yards for a score. So the defense provided 14 of those points. And then offensively, Denison gets 27 carries for 194 yards and 2 touchdowns. from Jack Alleman. Jacoby DeHorney adds a touchdown run. He only had 2 carries for 42 yards, but one of them was a 28-yard touchdown in the middle of that third quarter push. Kyson Lusain, 6 catches for 89 yards and a 21-yard touchdown catch from Ty Rhodes, who was 9 for 14 for 110 yards. With that touchdown, Dennison, no turnovers, strong defensively, got some key plays on special teams, recovering a punt that hit an up man in the second half to basically be able to just hold possession for almost the last part of the fourth quarter. Another punt by Matt Rangel was downed at the 1-yard line. He also had a 57-yard punt. So some good stuff all around for Dennison, obviously. For Sherman, opening the Josh Alleman era. Yes, he is cousins to Jack. So when Alleman was going to leave the field happy, and unfortunately for Sherman, after a coaching change, after some changes to personnel, obviously through graduation on offense and defense, not the way that they wanted to come out. This was a game, like I said, it was literally, less than seconds away from being just 7-0 at halftime, and you could sort of sense how big that shift was right before halftime, and then Sherman comes out and goes 3-and-out really quickly to open the second half. Obviously, if Sherman goes in and scores and it's tied at halftime at 7, or if they even score there to make it 14-7, you get the feeling it's obviously going to be a different game. But they were playing from behind the whole time. Dennison came out. Sherman deferred to the second half. They won the toss, and Dennison took the ball and went right down and scored in about 8 or 9 plays with a short Alleman run, and then that they were playing from behind the whole way. But obviously, up until that point, it looked like it was a defensive battle. Obviously, we mentioned the defensive scores. Sherman got a couple of fourth down stops. Dennison had some as well. It did seem like this was going to be one of those sort of low scoring games until Dennison was able to kind of pull away there in the third quarter. And obviously frustrating for Sherman to have that be the opening to a new era. There's a lot of Sherman alums on that staff who have had success in this rivalry, and to not just get it done. Last year's game, 28-21. To have it come down to plays in the fourth quarter, to have it be every snap be meaningful, to go from this to where, like I said, it's 35-0 at the end of the third quarter, and the game be out of reach, and to struggle to put things together on both sides of the ball is obviously frustrating. But both teams have to deal with the emotions coming off this game. Both teams have to get ready for district. In Sherman's case, they only have their next game that we're going to talk about, and then it is district play. And Dennison's not far behind. They've got 2 games before they get into district play, and these are 2 programs that were middle of the pack in their districts last year. Dennison finishing 5th and 1 game out of the playoffs, and Sherman, Sherman had an up and down district run. They would beat some people that they probably shouldn't have based on record, and then they lost to some people that they needed to get a win over to stay in that race. And in that tough Frisco district where it's all the Friscos and them. They had a chance to win a couple games that they lost by single digits. That would have kept them in the mix till the end. So it's you got to put it away whether you win or lose. And it's over, it's done with, and we'll deal with it. I assume because it's a realignment year, when we never know how that's going to go. it can either really only be the first game or the second game. So I assume it's going to stay as the first game. So you're 360 whatever days away from doing it again. And you come back and get ready for the game that you have this week, and you can't worry about whether you won or lost it. But it stays in Denison. It's really kind of crazy to think that the streak it continues to go because the law of averages and the way sports is that it's going to end sometime. You just don't know when it's going to end. And obviously there was a chance last year that it was going to end because the game was so close, and there's been one or two other games where Sherman's had a chance to take it back and to have this game kind of get where it was. We have not seen this in a while. I think 2010 was a game very similar to this, except it was flipped. And that's when Sherman won that one 39-0, and that was a game that was it was a little more out of hand at halftime, but it was one of those games that once we got into the second half and you could kind of see the way the game was going, it was kind of a question of just sort of getting the game over with, and that was a game that was at Denison. So you had obviously the visiting side of that stadium was very happy, and not just for the lopsided nature of the game, but also just because that was a Sherman team trying to get back the axe after Denison had that run with those really good teams, Jordan Taylor and DJ Jones, Jermaine Mundine, that went super deep in the playoffs. They were coming off that state semifinal year, and all those guys graduated, and they had won it 3 years in a row, and had started the streak with that crazy comeback when they were sophomores. That kind of said, hey guys, they kind of announced their arrival when they pulled that off, and they won in 2008 and 2009 pretty handily, and then 2010, Sherman went on a streak of winning 3 in a row, but that first year they won it 39-0. So this game felt very much like that. And it's obviously it's very rare that there have been shutouts in this game. Outside of those two, you look at the years and you go, 2023. Before that, you have to go back 13 years to 2010. And then before that, you have to go back to 1994 when Sherman won by shutout. So it's been really rare that the defenses dominate that well. And so you tip your hat and you move on, and if you're Denison, you focus on Frisco Reedy, who they are hosting, and then if you're Sherman, you're going on the road to Princeton, looking to bounce back. So we'll start with that one there. Sherman's going to Princeton. Princeton's also 0-1. They lost 24-23 against Frisco Lebanon Trail. This was a game last year that Sherman won 34-30, and it was one of those sort of back and forth games. Sherman was able to hang on at the end. Princeton went 1-9 last year, and their only win was against the Lebanon Trail. So the fact that they lost the Lebanon Trail this year, probably not a good sign. And obviously we'll see Princeton at the end, towards the end of the year, because they're in Denison's district. But this is an opportunity for Sherman to go on the road, show its mettle, lick its wounds, and come back and play well. There were some bright spots. Last week, Randy Nelson had 4 catches for 70 yards. Colby Ray Short had a couple of catches, including a 41-yarder. But obviously the focus, I'm sure, this week is probably going to be, can we work on the running game? That's going to need to be an improvement. Obviously, you can't run for less than a yard per carry. But like I said, there were some moments in the passing attack. Sherman did have two possessions that got inside the red zone, including one that got to the Denison 9-yard line before that bad snap on a fumble that Denison was able to recover. But they moved the ball at times okay. It was obviously just being able to finish it. And so I think that's obviously going to be the focus of that. And I thought, for the most part, I thought their defense did okay to pretty well. Again, that they went almost 2.5 quarters and only gave up one touchdown to the Denison offense. And so they were in the game. Obviously, the offense didn't help that side of the ball, and it makes you wonder, like, if they could have put together a drive or two, would that have changed the course of the game? But I thought for the most part, Sherman's defense played well, especially in the first half, to hold Denison to just the opening drive touchdown, and then they got some fourth down stops. They held them from getting in the end zone again, and so I think there's obviously something to build on there. And last year, the defense did play well throughout the season. The games that Sherman lost, half of them were, they lose a game, 13, I think it's 14-7 or 13-6, something like that. Like when they lost some games, it wasn't because the offense gave up a ton of points. So they played well, and a couple of those guys are back this year. And so I thought they did well there, and I think this is a chance for them to get right. We saw last year in this stretch, after losing the game last year against Denison, that they won 2 out of the next 3, and I think this is a chance for them to, and the game that they lost in the middle was one of those games by single digits against Centennial. That there's a chance if they can figure some things out, gain a little confidence. They're playing 3 teams those are winnable games, and a month from now we could be easily talking Sherman could be 3-1, and at the very worst maybe 2-2. And this will be the first step in that direction. I don't think Lebanon Trail played particularly well. They didn't have a whole lot of yardage. They took advantage of some turnovers. They needed to block an extra point. That's why it was 24-23. And otherwise it probably would have gone to overtime, and they got an interception at the end when Princeton was trying to drive to at least get in the field goal position. So I think it's a good step. They're obviously going on the road. That'll be interesting. Last year this game, like I said, was at home. And so we'll see what happens there. But Sherman's going to go to Princeton on Friday night, looking to rebound, and I think they're in a good spot to be able to do that. And then, like I said, get a little confidence going into that district opener that's going to be on a short week, because that's going to be on a Thursday after they play on Friday night in Princeton. And then Denison, they are hosting Frisco Reedy on Friday night. So that's sort of the opposite of what Sherman's going to be doing with next week. Last year Denison, had that dramatic win against Sherman, the comeback win, and then they had to turn around and play on a Thursday because the game was in Frisco. They went to the Star, so obviously that's a big deal. Frisco Reedy was, highly ranked. They're highly ranked this year, and they ended up losing 41-7 in a game that they almost got shut out in. If not for a late touchdown there, they were able to get, second half touchdown. They were able to avoid getting shut out there. So a lot of the faces are different for Frisco Reedy, but they're still ranked 7th in the state. They're coming off a 37-14 win against Azle. But it is a lot of different names than the guys that we saw last year that put up the big points. Reedy made it all the way to the region semifinals. They obviously winning Sherman's District 6-5A, Division 1. And their only loss was by 2 points to Mansfield Timberview in the in the region semifinals, and they were both undefeated. So obviously that was going to be the first loss for somebody. Obviously the big thing when Denison's faced Reedy the last couple times they've played them, in the 3 games, Reedy scored at least 35 points. And I think this is going to be a good test about where Denison's defense is, because that was obviously, when you look at the scores from last year and the games that they lost and what kept them out of the playoffs, was giving up a lot of yards, giving up a lot of points. They had that stretch in district play where they didn't force a punt for like 3 games. They played Melissa, who is started this year ranked number 1. They lost by 10 points to them, and they scored 44 points, but they gave up 54 points. And obviously Lovejoy they've struggled to slow down Lovejoy. Terrell had a big game against them offensive wise. Crandall did, and obviously Frisco Reedy did, and a lot of that was teams putting up 40 plus points on that defense. Talking with Coach Wallace, the defensive coordinator, after the game against Sherman, and he said, all they heard for the last year was how they weren't very good. And a lot of the guys are back. That it was a defense last year that lost 9 starters from the year before. There were some injuries along the way as the season went on. They had to just kind of plug and play guys and trying to find bodies at certain positions because the depth got worn down by those injuries. And I think they've taken it to heart this year. And obviously when you come out and do what you did the first game, they were flying around, forcing the turnovers, coming up with key plays, and so I think this will be an interesting one to kind of see how much is the improvement year over year. And that's the thing. I'll probably say this with a lot of these teams when it comes to realignment. The second year of a realignment is always interesting. I think it's more interesting because the path that you need to go to make the playoffs based on what you did against those teams last year. Like, if you made the playoffs, well, it's because you beat A, B, and C. So if you do that again, you're probably going to the playoffs. And if you didn't make it, it's, well, we didn't beat X, Y, and Z, so we got to find a way to beat one of those teams or 2 of those teams to get in this time, as long as the results hold from week to week. That happened last year. And then since in non-district stuff, when you're playing teams, it's obviously always interesting to see, if you lost last year, did you win this year, or did you play somebody closer? There is a bit of a gauge there of how much better are you, whether it's because there's a coaching change or whether you have all your kids back or you had to lose a lot of kids. I think it's a lot more interesting than the first year because you don't really know going in, okay, where do we fit into this district? We think we're better than this team, but we won't know until we actually play them. Whereas now you can kind of look at it and say, well, we were better than that team last year. We expect to at least beat those teams. And how do we find a ways to beat the teams that we lost to? So I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. Frisco Reedy hit a lot of big plays in a lot of third down situations last year, and it's going to be interesting to see. The Denison defense is gonna want to live up to the expectation now. You do that against your rival to open the season. What can you do in week 2? And it's not a short week, so you never know how that affects a team. And so they're gonna be in their normal schedule, welcoming what people think is one of the top teams in the state again this year. Despite all the changes that they've had. So Denison's going to be at home against Frisco Reedy on Friday night. We just talked about Frisco Lebanon Trail, and we will talk about them because they are making a trip up here to take on Van Alstyne. So we talked about, obviously, Lebanon Trail is 0-1 because of the loss to Princeton, and Van Alstyne is 0-1 after they lost 28-22 against Pottsboro. That was a game that back and forth-ish. Van Alstyne led after the first quarter. Pottsboro led 21-8 at halftime. Van Alstyne gets the only touchdown in the third quarter. and then Pottsboro goes up 28-16 and is able to hang on in that game. Leading the way for the Panthers was Weston Johnston. He had 6 carries for 68 yards and a touchdown, and was 12 of 32 passing for 147 yards and a touchdown to Castor Fonseca, who led VA with 6 catches for 81 yards. Brady Carson had more than 100 yards from scrimmage. He had 13 carries for 66 yards and a touchdown, and 5 catches for 56 yards receiving. And this was a close game last year between Van Alstyne and Pottsboro, and it came down to the end again as well. Van Alstyne scored in the final couple minutes, had a chance to try for the onside kick, where didn't get it, and Pottsboro was able to run out the clock. If you're looking at this as this is a chance for a team coming off a loss in the season opener. It's a team they beat last year. It was a close game last year, 30-26, but Van Alstyne was able to pull it out. Obviously, the only question is with Lebanon Trail, they're coming off a win, and this is a team last year that only won 2 games, that only won a game last year, and then also only had 1 win the year before that. So they had back-to-back 1-win seasons. They've already got 1 win, and so I'm sure they're going to be high, feeling good about themselves, making the plays down the stretch in the fourth quarter to win that game last week. And if you're Van Alstyne, again, it's a good chance for you to bounce back, because it's a team that you can compete with, even though they're they are a full they're 3 divisions ahead of you. You're 4A Division 2 and they're 5A Division 1. But you did compete with them last year, and it's at your place. And honestly, the only thing that hurt them last week, and it's going to hurt a lot of people who play Pottsboro, was that they had trouble containing Major McBride. But that's going to be the story for a lot of people again this year when you play Pottsboro. But again, it's an intriguing matchup because of how close the game was last year, and like I said, Lebanon Trail's ahead of schedule based on last year. So how do they handle that success coming into this game, or is it another game where Van Alstyne's able to bounce back after losing a close game to which last year was a very good Pottsboro team, and again this year what is expected to be a very good Pottsboro team as well. So it will be interesting to see how Van Alstyne bounces back when they host Lebanon Trail. Couple local games, all local teams this coming week again. I think we talked about this last year. It's really fun to have a bunch of games each week where we have 2 local teams. Obviously, we have that in district a lot, but we have that in non-district almost every week for the first couple weeks of the season. And the big game again for week 2 between the local teams is Whitesboro at Bells. Both are 1-0. Whitesboro's coming off a win over Crum, 49-28. And Bells won their opener. They played on Thursday against Munster, 34-19. And those are both the results that happened last year. So we have 1-0 versus 1-0 again. And both of the last 2 games against each other have been decided by a combined 11 points. Last year, this was a 31-27 game. The year before that went to overtime. But these teams showing up are going to have a lot of new faces in a lot of places. Some of the guys for Whitesboro are known maybe because they were at other positions or they got some playing time, obviously with some of the games that they had. But graduation hit both of these teams pretty hard. But the expectations are still deep playoff runs. Whitesboro went to the region final for the second straight year, and Bells has been in the region semifinal in Division 2 for 3 of the last 4 years. So they're trying to do that again. Hopefully, trying to break through against the holiday obstacle that's gotten in their way. And like I said last year, I give these 2 programs credit for playing each other. They're obviously among the best in their division, among the best in their region. Depending on, I mean, last year they were both ranked, and they had really good seasons. Between the two of them. So it's great to see this game. Like we mentioned, Whitesboro's coming off the win over Crum. I looked this up because I thought this was an interesting thing. So the 49 points in the opener for Whitesboro is the most they've ever scored in a season opener since a 50-7 win over Tom Bean in 1935. I thought that was a fun little note when I saw that they scored 49 points. I said, when's the last time that's happened? And I went digging for that. Max Parker led the way, 12 carries, 92 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Also had 3 catches for 42 yards. Clay Hermey's taken over at quarterback for his cousin Mac Harper. He jumped in as the full-time quarterback now, and he was 18 of 26 for 206 yards and 2 touchdowns and 47 yards and a touchdown on 12 carries. Carter Sluter back at the receiver spot along with Brett Donaldson. They've kind of moved up in the pecking order to be 1-2 after some graduation spots there. They were really good last year, and there's going to be a heavy emphasis on them again this year. Sluter has 5 catches for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. Donaldson 7 catches for 53 yards. And a pretty easy win. I know the score looks a lot closer, and not that 21 points would be close, but Crum scored a couple late touchdowns when the game was out of reach to kind of make it look better than what it is. And obviously, the big thing with Whitesboro is how are they going to handle the loss of all the guys that they had, whether it's Harper, Grayson Ledbetter was an all-state caliber running back. So Parker's got the big shoes to fill there. Now he goes from the backup / number 2 option in every game to being the guy. How do those receivers handle stepping up for some of the guys that they were able to spread the ball around with a guy like Jay Sanders, who graduated, and then defensively, they have some key guys that they lost as well. And so how is Whitesboro going to handle that? Obviously, we know the big thing with their schedule is Brock, not only for being in district with them, but also that's the team that has eliminated them in the region final. Brock went to the state championship game and lost on a field goal. A lot of people are predicting them at the very least to get back to the championship game, if not, projected to win the whole thing. Paradise was really good last year. They brought a lot of people back. Right now, Paradise is ranked in the top 10. So obviously, I think it's relatively obvious at this point that those are the 3 best teams in the district. And the question is, what is the order going to be? On the last couple, last year it was Brock, Whitesboro, Paradise. So we'll see if that holds as things get going. But obviously a good solid start for Whitesboro, and I think as we get closer to district there, just to kind of see where they stand, and obviously Bells is a good measuring stick. So they're, like I said, they're coming off the 34 to 19 win over Munster. And this one, Easton Helgren had 10 carries, 161 yards, and 3 touchdown runs. He also caught a 30-yard touchdown pass from Easton Branham, which that, of course, if you're knowing Bells, that was the only completion because Bells only ended up throwing 2 passes and one was a touchdown. So that's kind of what you expect from them. Hayden Allen, 13 carries for 119 yards and a touchdown to kind of extend the lead a little bit there in the fourth quarter. So Bells, new faces. Guys that were down the depth chart, but have seen some playing time as sort of the 3rd or 4th or 5th option. Change at quarterback, obviously with graduation, with Branham winning that job as one of the trio of sophomores that went into the fall practice trying to win that job. There's not a Baker in the backfield anymore. It's been a while since we've been able to say that for Bells. Grady Waldrop was a guy who's, a 4-year guy in this offense. And so it's off to a good start. Like I said, you never know when guys have to become the number 1 option or the number 2 option after being the number 4 option and the number 5 option and sort of that way. But the numbers for the most part look like a Bells win. Rushing for over 300 yards. Scoring in every quarter, scoring in the 30s. If there is one issue, there were 3 fumbles, and so maybe that's one of those things where you kind of look at it and go, we've got to clean that up. Obviously, when you're running 40 or 50 or 60 plus times, there's obviously more opportunities to lose the ball, and that's probably the one thing that they've harped on getting ready for this game. But again, I think you also look at it and say, Bells was one of those teams you don't know what it was going to look like. You have a good idea going into a season because of what they've done there the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever. And I think that's a good start. It looked pretty much like what you expect out of Bells. Munster was down a little bit last year, but they're Munster. They obviously are a traditional power at the 2A level. You go on the road on a Thursday night which every night last week was a hot night, but that was a really hot night, and they started at 7:00. And to come away with a win like that, I think that's good. And again, this is a good measuring stick for both teams. It's unfortunate somebody's got to lose one of these games. They've been really good games. They've come down to the wire, and Whitesboro's pulled them out. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Whitesboro going to Bells. Again, I think that's going to be the game around here that everybody's going to really have their eyes on, especially out of the 3 local matchups. That's obviously the biggest one on the table for this week. The other 3A Division I team, Pottsboro, obviously we touched on them a little bit in saying that they won 28-22 against Van Alstyne. They're going to look to get to 2-0 against Callisburg. They're visiting the Wildcats this week. Callisburg's coming off a 55-24 win against Pilot Point. This is a series that Pottsboro has dominated. They've won 9 of the last 10 meetings, and they again. You have 2 teams that are in good that have been in good shape for the most part. And Pottsboro's got the big expectations again. Going into last year, what were they going to look like? They ended up going undefeated in their district. Went a couple rounds deep before getting knocked off. And I think that there's some pretty big expectations as well. And a lot of that hinges on, as we said, teams that are going up against Pottsboro have to deal with Major McBride, who last week had 24 carries, 280 yards, had scored all 4 of the touchdowns. One of them was 77 yards, another one was 69 yards. Actually did have a 5th touchdown called back on a penalty. So he's off to a good start. He actually went over the 3,000 career rushing yard mark as he's getting ready to it's a good start to your senior season to hit a milestone like that, and you still got at least 9 games and probably a couple more after that to kind of see what you can put together. But another strong performance from him. New quarterback, Caden Humphrey. He had 15 carries for 96 yards, 11 of 20 passing for 136 yards with an interception. Cameron Saunders led the receivers, 4 catches for 74 yards. Carson Busher had 1 catch and went for 33 yards. And so I think it's gonna you don't want to say it boils down to one guy, but I think that's sort of what it's looking like. Pottsboro ends up with over 500 yards of offense. I did mention the penalty that they did have 11 penalties for 90 yards. So if you're looking at them having to clean something up, I think that would be it from week 1. But again, it was a It was a game. They were able to get a multiple score lead. Van Alstyne tried to make the comeback. They were able to hold on, so that's obviously a good sign for Pottsboro. And going to Callisburg, they seem to be a little more balanced. It looked like from game one, throwing it around a little bit more. This was an offensive game last year. Pottsboro won 55-36, so maybe we get a little bit of a shootout. Back and forth. Can you kind of top this type of thing? But like I said, obviously, Pottsboro's, they've always got big expectations, and the year that they had last year, with a lot of guys that they have coming back, that I think that's sort of the expectations, and obviously the big thing for them on offense was who was going to win the quarterback job, and who at the receiver spots is going to show that they can be a weapon or at least a reliable target. They had guys last year like Reed Thompson that could stretch the field, keep people from loading up the box to try to stop McBride, and I think that's obviously the big thing as we watch these next couple of non-district games is can Humphrey make the plays? He doesn't have to make them all the time. He's got to keep people honest enough to where you can keep people from making you one dimensional. And I think that's a pretty decent start for that. And we'll just kind of see how that goes with Pottsboro going to Callisburg this Friday night. Moving down into the 3A Division II ranks for the teams we have that are playing there. We will start with the one that involves the all-local matchup, and that is Howe at Tom Bean. Howe is coming off a 62-0 loss against Honeygrove, so they're 0-1, while Tom Bean is coming off a 48-22 win against Cumbie. This was a game last year that Howe won 49-6. And Howe has won the last 4 meetings, but obviously a disastrous start to this season in losing 62-0. Obviously, you don't score a point. Obviously, you have 8 turnovers. 6 of them were fumbles. Cooper Jones, who took over at quarterback for Austin Haley, and a lot of those guys that were in that senior class that turned a back-to-back 0-10 season into a playoff team last year. He got hurt. I don't know how much of a difference it may have made in the grand scheme of things, because this was a game that Honeygrove was up 35-0 at halftime. But all those things certainly did not help. I think I think Honeygrove scored off of all of the turnovers except for one, and 2 of them were defensive scores. There was an interception return for a touchdown and a fumble recovery that in the end zone. So at least 14 of the points right there, were directly off 2 of the turnovers. And Honeygrove is good. Honeygrove is ranked in 2A Division I. They had a really good year last year. And they have a lot of those guys back, and they're expecting big things there. And this was a close game last year that I'm sure they came out thinking we probably should have won last year, and let's go try to take advantage of a team that is semi-rebuilding, especially at some key spots, especially when you talk about the quarterback spot and you talk about a new running back and some new guys on defense as well. People moving around to fill the holes of people that have graduated or whatever. So not a good start for Howe. Tom Bean, however, gets off to a 1-0 start for the second straight year. They beat Cumbie last year, and that ended a long losing streak for them. And they haven't scored this many points since 2018, and that also happens to be the last time that the Tomcats were 2-0. So that's what they're shooting for this week. But 48 to 22, it's 28-0 after the first quarter. Cumbie didn't score until the second half. And by then the game was over. Leading the way for the Tomcats was Bobby Rogers at quarterback, 10 of 16 passing for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns, and ran 7 times for 102 yards and a touchdown. Hagan Darney, 5 carries, 64 yards, 2 touchdowns. Braylon Barrett, his lone run was an 81-yard touchdown scamper. Garrett Kelly had 2 catches for 44 yards on a touchdown and also returned a fumble for a touchdown, and Colin Cherry had 2 catches, one of which was a touchdown as well. And so again, another good start for Tom Bean. They did this last year. They won another game and then got into district play and then finished last. But you're talking about a team that went from 0-9 because they had one less game to 2-8. So you made the progress. Again, you beat a team this year that you beat last year. So again, I think that's a good, and you beat them by a much bigger margin. Last year's game was close. And you went on the road and did it. So that's obviously another good sign. And then you have a chance that you're taking on a team that beat you badly last year and is limping into this one for a variety of reasons, and you have a chance to get to 2-0 and match all your wins from last year. Now, we've touched on it before. We have to touch on it again because no matter what Tom Bean does in district play, they are ineligible to go to the playoffs as part of the UIL ruling from last year. That ruling came out in the middle of last year. So they kind of started the year thinking, oh, we're going to go to the playoffs, whatever, we've got a chance, whatever, all that sort of stuff. And then that came out, and then they had to sort of play the role of spoiler. So they've got to do that again. And I think the one thing that they're looking at is because they are playing a lot of guys who will be back next year. There's a lot of juniors and sophomores involved in the start, starting on both sides of the ball this year of let's just be as best as we can be, put up whatever record we put up, whether it's a winning record, whether it's 4-6 or whatever, let's spoil things for some people. Let's not, let's finish 3rd or 4th and let people know that we're coming next year for one of those playoff spots because we're going to have a lot of those guys back. And so I think that's obviously the trajectory that Tom Bean wants to go on, is set things up really well for what they could do next year in terms of making a playoff spot because they can't this year. So a good chance for them to get off to 2-0. And I think they're probably feeling pretty good about themselves and what they did last week. And like I said, I'm sure they saw the score and to see how not score any points that they could find a way to do it. And they again with Cumbie they forced 6 turnovers against Cumbie. Held them under 250 yards. And like I said, all 3 of the touchdowns for Cumbie came in the second half when the game was well in hand. So that's obviously going to be an interesting one. Last year this was 2 teams. Somebody was going to be 2-0, and after the rough patches that they had the previous couple years, that was going to be exciting for somebody just to be able to say, hey, we're 2-0. And obviously that was Hal that was on the way to having a playoff year. So that's going to be an interesting one when Hal visits Tom Bean on Friday night. We talked about Bells already from that district. So we will talk about the other all-local matchup because we're skipping out of that district of S&S is playing at Tioga. Somebody's going to get their first win in this game because S&S opened with a 33-25 loss against Bonham, and Tioga lost 48-20 against Collinsville. Last year, Tioga won this game 48-14. And I think this is intriguing for a couple of reasons. One, obviously with Tioga, they have a new coach, but with S&S, they were in that boat last year, having a new coach, changing some things, and they played Bonham much tougher than they did last year. They tried to rally in the third quarter. They scored 3 times in the third quarter to get within a couple points, but then unfortunately Bonham did the only scoring in the fourth quarter to be able to win that game 33-25. After SNS, and I think that's a good sign if you're SNS. They were down 24-7 at halftime, and they find a way to get as close as they did going to the fourth quarter. They just weren't able to find a way to either go ahead or get the tying score there to win that game. And so I think, like I said, that's a good sign for SNS in year 2 under Coach Hill. And they did it with their ground attack. All 253 yards for them came on the ground. Tanner Skitt had 13 carries for 138 yards and a touchdown. Hunter Corville had 17 carries for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns to account for the offensive touchdowns. And Daniel Hernandez had a fumble return, chipping in from the defensive side. And so obviously that's progress. I think I noted. So the 25 points that SNS scored, that's just the second time they've scored at least 25 points in a game in their last 18 games. So again, that's sort of the optimism of a program that only won 1 game last year and moved into a new district, kind of struggled in that regard, but a much better effort to their matchup with Bonham this year, and so that's obviously something to build on. It's I know people don't like to compare scores, or it's a loser's cry. Oh, you only lost by 7 instead of 28, but that shows improvement. That's a tangible improvement. Whatever anybody says against the same opponent, it's better than nothing. Everybody wants to win, but sometimes you got to find the positives, and the fact that they were able to do what they did in this game is good. Obviously, the fact that they didn't have much of a passing attack, only threw the ball twice. Both of those throws were intercepted. They leaned on what was working, but obviously, like I said, you want to try to provide a little bit more of a threat there. To keep teams honest instead of running 41 times and having them know that you're running 41 times. So that might be something we look forward to with this matchup against Tioga, is what can they do passing wise, in addition to having 2 backs that went over for 100 yards and got the job done on the ground. Maybe need a little more diversity to that offense to kind of be able to come up with a win. In Tioga, like we said, they've got the new coach this year in Zach Birdwell, taking over and sort of changing the whole philosophy of what Chad Rogers did before he left to go to Sanger. Was much more run-oriented last year in winning a district title, getting the playoffs. Coach Birdwell is more air raid, passing, getting the ball out in space. That's what he likes to do, and that was obviously sort of their plan last week. The run pass ratio was very skewed towards the pass. Part of that was they were behind 27-13 at halftime. And you're playing a team in Collinsville who's ranked this week. They're at 6th in the rank in the top 10 rankings for 2A Division II. But Tioga threw it 45 times last week. And they only ran it 9. Hayden Hilliard is healthy in at quarterback and showed some good things at times. Was 16 of 44 for 225 yards. Did have 2 interceptions, but also had a couple of touchdown passes. He also ran for a touchdown. And one of those touchdowns was to Austin Norwood. He had 2 catches for 68 yards. Caden Maldonado had 6 catches for 57 yards. Slade Babbitt had 2 for 39 and had the other touchdown. and there wasn't a whole lot in the way of running. I think that's by design. And again, you're facing a really good Collinsville team that they lost to last year as well. And again, Collinsville is coming off a season where they only lost twice, and the second loss was in the region finals, the /state quarterfinals to eventual champion Albany. They went undefeated. They went 9-1 in the regular season last year, and did a lot of what they did this last week. Putting up a lot of points, putting up a lot of yards. We'll talk about them when we talk about their game here in a second. But to focus on Tioga, obviously, you want to see what it's going to look like. You don't know what it's going to look like until you get out there. And I think it was one of those deals. Again, it was also on a Thursday. You don't know if the weather, the temperatures mattered. They did push the kickoff back a little bit, but it was still pretty hot when that game started because it was the game I was at. And they did have, it was a mix of good and bad. There were some plays that you were like, okay, and there were some drops, and there were some there were some issues. Obviously defensively it's really hard to stop Collinsville because of what they have spread out all over the field. And so I don't know how much of a gauge you want to put on that one. Like we said, this was a game that Tioga lost by multiple touchdowns last year, and they ended up going undefeated in their district. They only ended up losing 3 games. They lost one more game in the regular season to finish 8-2. So you don't want to judge the snap reaction can be a lot harsher when the sample size is this small. But we'll see what Tioga can look like against S&S. And like I said, somebody's going to come away with their first win of the season. It'll be interesting to see who it is that gets that victory when S&S goes down to Tioga. And then the last game in this 3A Division II gaggle is of course the Gunner Tigers. That would be your defending 3A Division II champion Gunner Tigers, who we didn't talk about this week last year because they didn't have a game. Nobody wanted to play them after about 3 teams canceled on them leading into the season, so they had an extra bye week at the beginning of the season. They found one this year. They had to go all the way to San Antonio to find one, but Cornerstone Christian made the trek up to North Texas. And Gunner sent them home with a 53-7 loss. It was, you hate to say, a typical sort of Gunner game that we expect from them. But they rush for 256 yards. They throw for 235 yards. They look like a team that's obviously, they're ranked number 2 in the rankings. Canadian is number 1. If you want to explain to me why you don't want to put Gunner as the number 1 team until they lose, that's fine. Are we looking probably at Canadian Gunner again in the state semifinals? Probably. But in this one, to kick off a season, Walker Overman, 7 of 9 passing, 162 yards and 4 touchdowns. He ran 13 times for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns. Hayden Ripamonte had a pair of catches for 60 yards and a touchdown. Dylan Tokars had 59 yards and a touchdown on two catches. Then he went to quarterback and ran for a touchdown. Colin Peacock had a 38-yard touchdown catch. Jace Martin had a touchdown catch. Brock Body led the way behind Overman in terms of rushing with 5 carries for 52 yards. Like I said, typical Gunner, really spreading out the stats because that's what Gunner does. I mean, they had the typical was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 13 guys carried the ball. They actually threw it more than what we have sort of seen out of Gunner. I know it was only 17 times, but it was with 3 different quarterbacks. Tokars and Preston Tarpley, were able to sling it around a little bit after Overman was out of the game. And for that, Gunner had 8 guys catch passes. And so, that's something that may be a little bit new this year, because you have Walker Overman in his second year in the system. You can't get much better than leading your team to an undefeated record in a state championship. But obviously he's in his second year as a starter. Maybe they're going to try to be a little more diverse to have people go, oh, they're going to throw the ball too. And obviously Cornerstone struggled. They did score in the first half, which is something a lot of people last year didn't do against Gunner. But it was 32-7 at halftime. Gunner added, 3 more scores in the second half to pull away. Cornerstone only had 181 yards of offense, and that's what Gunner did to kick off its season. They have one of the most interesting games out of the all local matchups. That's going to be on Thursday at 7:00. They are playing Prosper Walnut Grove in Prosper at Children's Health Stadium, and you're saying, who the heck is Prosper Walnut Grove? And I will tell you. Prosper Walnut Grove is the third high school in Prosper, and they are actually open. They actually opened a year earlier. They were supposed to open next fall, and they would have slid into the upcoming realignment in February, and everything was going to be fine and dandy. However, they were able to open early, and they said, well, let's do that. The problem with doing that from an athletic standpoint is you're not in a district and you don't have a schedule from last year, and people already have made their schedule based on, like, it's already set in stone from last year. You're just playing the same people, except you're playing them in at a different location. If you went to somebody last year, you're hosting them this year, and vice versa. Walnut Grove didn't do anything last year because they didn't exist. So they're just playing an outlaw schedule. They tried to find whoever they could find to make a schedule. Last week they went to Arkansas and played the defending 4A champions in Arkansas, a team called Malvern, and they won 57-54. I don't know anything about Malvern. I did a quick Google search. They've got some Division I guys. A guy's going to Colorado State. Obviously, they're defending 4A champions. I don't know how many of those guys are back. But this is a program, if you're at Walnut Grove, if they were playing in a district this year, they would be a 5A Division II team. And Gunner is 3A Division II. So Gunner's punching way above its weight class in this game. But I would say Walnut Grove is punching way above its weight class in a lot of regard, because they played, this defending champion Arkansas team. They're playing Gunner, who obviously is one of the best teams in 3A. Next week they're going to play Salina. Obviously everybody knows Salina. They're playing Gilmer. Gilmer's always a contender out in East Texas. They're playing Anna, who's coming off a great season that they had last year. They're playing a bunch of private schools to finish their season because they had to find just teams to be able to play. So I'm really interested, one, to see what this record looks like at the end of the season, and two, what does Gunner do against a program of this size? Because they normally don't go this far above and beyond. They go like into the 4A level. They go into the 3A Division I level. They've played like Van Alstyne, who's 4A Division II. So I'm super intrigued that this program that didn't exist. I think somebody said they only have one senior on the whole roster. It's either one senior on the roster or one senior in the starting lineup. To go do what they did last year was opened a lot of people's eyes. And obviously you're talking about Walnut Grove is pulling from their enrollment from both probably Prosper and Rock Hill, just based on the way the boundaries are. So those are two pretty good 6A programs. And now you have some of that talent at this level. It's gonna be really interesting to see that game on Thursday at 7. I'm gonna be at that game to write about it and see. In the long run, it's not gonna mean anything because Gunner's Gunner, and as long as they finish first in district, the same path that they have taken the last couple of years will still be there. And they also have some other big non-district games coming up. But it is super intriguing to see them going up against a 5A program that they could be really good. I don't know. It's really intriguing. So I'm excited to see that game on Thursday night when I go down to Prosper to watch Gunner at Walnut Grove. Hitting on a couple of the lower level games. When we get to the 2A teams, let's talk about, as I go down my list of games, we'll talk about Collinsville because we already talked about Tioga in their game. So let's talk about Collinsville since that was the all-local matchup last week. We mentioned Collinsville won 48-20. They looked like the Collinsville of last season, which they should because they basically brought back everybody. They did what they did all of last season, where their only losses were to Cooper and, like I mentioned, to Albany. They put up big points. They put up gaudy stats. They did that again last week. They had 560 yards of offense. Logan Jenkins was 39 of 45 passing for 390 yards and 6 touchdowns passing. He also had a touchdown run as well. Reed Patterson had 10 carries for 64 yards. When it comes to receivers, Colin Barnes, 6 catches, 108 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Rylan Newman, 7 catches for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. Carter Scott, 11 catches for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. And like we said, that was a game where it was 27-13 at halftime, and then Collinsville scores 3 times in the third quarter to put that game away. And again, it looked like what the big expectations of Collinsville have for the season to make another deep run. Knowing that Albany is there waiting there, hopefully on the other side of the bracket. They're going to play a Blue Ridge team coming off a 41-14 victory against Boyd. They have an interim coach who is also the offensive coordinator from last year. So putting up a big offensive total, maybe somewhat expected because he knows the offense. I think that's a pretty good looking win for Blue Ridge to open with. The last year's game, this was a shootout. This was 54-50. And Collinsville had to score late to win that game. Collinsville has won 9 of the last 10 meetings. I probably wouldn't be shocked if this is another shootout again. The big concern for Collinsville is that Carter Scott got hurt last week, injured his shoulder, and missed a good chunk of the third quarter of the second half. At the time, they didn't think it was serious. The question is probably going to be how long is he out? I would assume he's probably not going to play this week just based on the way everything looked, and I would assume that they would probably want to be as cautious with injuries as possible because the ones that matter obviously are coming up in district, and they're going to have some key battles with at least Santo and Munster to try to defend their district title. So that may be something to look at. What does the offense look like maybe the next couple weeks? Losing one of their key guys, and he's also a starter on defense. So, when you're at the small school level and you lose guys, it's a luck of the draw. You might lose 2 starters and not just one because of what they do offensively and defensively. But so that'll be interesting to see with Collinsville hosting Blue Ridge, and that's going to be a 7:00 start. So be aware of that. But again, I think that has the feeling of maybe a shootout like it was last year. So that'll be interesting to see as well. So we talked about Tioga. We talked about Tom Bean. So we can talk about the White Red Tigers, another team with a new coach. They get off to an exciting start to their season with their 26-20 victory in overtime against Clarksville, going on the road. They find a way to pull this game out. It's obviously close all the way through. They're down 7-6 after the first quarter. They're down 7-6 at halftime. They're down 14-12 going to the fourth quarter. Clarksville scores. White Red is able to block the extra point, and then White Wright goes and scores and gets the 2-point conversion to tie and force the overtime. And then in the overtime, Kenneth York has the deciding touchdown to give White Wright the win in Blake Yancey's debut as the head coach. York had 17 carries for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jaden Bellamy had 13 carries for 135 yards and a touchdown, and he also caught a 26-yard touchdown pass from Colt Yancey, who the freshman won the quarterback job there, and they are going to look to carry that momentum into their game at home against Celeste, who is also 1-0. Celeste won 21-0 against Trenton. That's also an interesting note, of course, because Trenton is in White Wright's district. This was a game last year that White Wright won 28-19. They've won 6 of the last 7. And if we're looking at scores, maybe this is a defensive battle. But White Wright, they're going to be a running team. That's what Coach Yancey did as the offensive coordinator at Frisco. It's wing T with spread principles, whatever you want to make of that. But they ran 43 times for 323 yards. They only threw 5 times. They got 35 yards, and one of them was, what we said, the 26-yard touchdown pass to Bellamy. So they're gonna run. And so it's gonna this could be a defensive battle. A lot of the games between Celeste have been, close. And Celeste allowed just 142 yards last week against Trenton. So could be a little bit of a slugfest. But a really good start for Clarksville, for White Wright by beating Clarksville. They've beaten them the last couple years, and they were able to keep that momentum going. And obviously, again, when you talk about, they had a lot of changes when it came to, key guys moving on. Obviously, you have a coaching change, you have a total change in offense, and it's a program that's been to the playoffs. I talked about it in the season preview. They can make the playoffs. They're trying to win in the playoffs. And this is obviously, a good first step to build the confidence for kids dealing with all that newness, to be able to come out, make the plays in the fourth quarter, find a way to win it, you got to score in overtime, find a way to score in overtime, get that win. And so that's where White Wright is going to their game against Celeste at home on Friday. And the last game that we'll talk about, like we said, welcome back, Texoma Christian. You are back after your 1-year hiatus in the TAPS 6-man ranks, and they are coming off a win. They won 51-6 against Dallas Fairhill. Very nice start to the return for the Eagles. Nate Reed, 4 of 7 passing, 93 yards, 3 touchdowns, and also returned an interception for a score. Kate Adley had a touchdown receiving, had a touchdown rushing, threw a touchdown pass. Jake Squires ran for 101 yards. Braden Green had two touchdown catches. Cooper Bradley added a touchdown. Chris that's a lot of names for a 6-man to have that many guys involved with touchdowns. But when you score 51 points, I guess that's kind of the case. So Texoma Christian, really good start for them. Really good to see. Because that's a program that I think has wanted, it's when you don't have the numbers, it's you can't do anything about it. But they do have some depth, as evidenced by all the names I just mentioned that were able to score in this game. A really good start. They're going to host Rockwall Providence this week. Rockwall Providence won last week, 60-7 in their game. So somebody's going to be 2-0, and the interesting thing about this matchup is so Texoma Christian's back in the mix after taking last year off. This is the second year of Rockwall Providence having a team. So they're young. They're obviously feeling really good about the win they had last week in a blowout. Texoma Christian obviously feeling real good about them having the blowout win that they had. And so that should be an interesting matchup. Rockwall Providence went 0-10 last year, so they've already said, hey, we're better than last year. Let's go beat this team. And again, if you're Texoma Christian, you've got a good start under your belt as you get ready for your district play. And it's going to be interesting to see what they can do now that they're back. They were a team that was making the playoffs. Like I said, before the hiatus, so it was just that they just didn't have the numbers to be able to have a team last year to sort of end that run. But now, like I said, they've got some depth, and it looks like they've got some players that are doing scoring in a variety of ways. So we'll see what Texoma Christian can do when they host Rockwell Providence on Friday night. So that is what is happening in week 2. That is what happened in the week 1. As football is here, it's underway, and we'll do this every week. You'll be able to hear it on Wednesdays. That's usually when it posts. So you'll be able to get a handle on what's coming in the next couple of days. Like I said, we're gonna have you're gonna want to get it on on Wednesday, because we're not just Friday nights. We got a Thursday game. We had a Thursday game. We had 2 Thursday games last week. We got a Thursday game this week. We got a Thursday game next week. I think six of the weeks we have Thursday games. So you're gonna wanna grab the podcast as soon as you can when it's out there on social media and everything, and post it on our website, heralddemocrat.com. So again, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast.